Ready? Ready. So let's talk. Hello, welcome to Let's Talk. I'm Salley Gibney. Our show today is Let's Talk about Emily Dickinson from a kid's point of view. So many people are really interested in Emily now, but there are a lot of children who are interested as well. So our show today is about the kids' perspective on Emily. I'm so thrilled to have as my co-host my granddaughter Lily Pels. Hi Lily.
Hi.
Thank you for being here. I'm excited that you're here.
I am too.
And my very dear friend Paula Mann, who is an actress and who has done the one-woman Belle of Amherst show about Emily Dickinson many times. Paula, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
This is so good. This is going to be so much fun. Now, Lily, tell us a little bit about you.
I'm 8 years old. I'm from Woodbridge, Connecticut, and I like to do gymnastics and dance.
And what's your favorite thing to do with gymnastics?
I like to do bars.
Oh, and what about dancing?
I like jazz.
And I love to see you do those moves. You're really good at that. And Paula, now tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm. I live here in Dorset. I was a professional actress for many years in New York City, and I worked for many years in Dorset as well, and I still work at the Old Castle Theater Festival. I'm also a teacher at Green Mountain College.
A professor?
A professor, yes. I'm an associate professor and director of the theater program at Green Mountain College. And I did the Belle of Amherst for my sabbatical, and I just did it a little over a year ago.
At the Dorset Playhouse?
I did it at the Dorset Playhouse, and I did it in conjunction with the Old Castle Theater Festival and director Eric Peterson.
And also up at Green Mountain College.
And I did it at Green Mountain College as well.
Yeah, and that's great.
Yes.
Now, how did you get to pick Emily Dickinson for your sabbatical?
Well, I wish I had gotten to know Emily Dickinson as a child, actually, because I think some of her poems are really wonderful, and they've got great images of nature, and they dig into deeper issues using images of nature. I wanted to do a one-woman show, and I had heard about the Belle of Amherst. I hadn't actually seen it, but I heard it was a really wonderful show.
Then how did you get to know it?
Well, the reason I ended up picking it is once I reread the play again, I just loved her poetry. I thought it was really beautiful, and I thought it also really brought in a lot of deeper issues about life. And she seemed to have a real love for life and a joy for living that really attracted me. And also I thought there was kind of a mystery about her because she became a recluse at the age of 30, in her late 30s, which I wondered why. And so I kind of wanted to explore that a little bit more and explore a little bit more about her life. She also lived in New England all of her life, not far actually from here. She lived in Amherst, Massachusetts. And so I thought she's a really typically kind of New England poet, and she was a woman.
Which made it a little closer to home.
Yes, and a woman as well, and
Yeah.
one of our great American poets, our first great American woman poet. So that to me was interesting. And she used a lot about nature in her poems.
Which is
a lot. She wrote a lot about birds and flowers, and really looking at life and death and the beauty of life through looking at nature
Yeah,
and
I
images
thought
of
she
nature.
liked baking and children too.
That's interesting. She did like to bake. In fact, her father loved her baking and said he only would eat bread that she baked.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
Yes, and she won
Your
some
mother makes a lot of
contests.
bread, doesn't
Yeah.
she, Lil?
Really?
Yes.
Oh, wow, yeah. And she did a lot of baking, won prizes for some of her baking contests at the local cattle shows. But we have to remember she was living in she was born in 1830 and lived until 1886. So during that time, most people would have a cook come in to do a lot of the baking or cooking. But she did a lot of it herself. And those were some of the favorite things she liked to do.
Now, Lily,
Absolutely.
excuse me, but Lily, you have a couple of questions that the children who come to the Emily Dickinson Museum in Amherst asked. Would you ask Paula those questions?
Okay. Why is Emily famous?
That's a very good question. I'm not sure I have all the answers. I can give you a couple of thoughts and ideas. One of them, I think, is that her poetry was very different from the poetry of the time, and that's one of the reasons she didn't get published at the time of her life. But after she died, when her poems were published, they were immediately incredibly wildly popular right away. Because I think the rhymes weren't typical rhymes. Some of the words she used, they were interesting word choices. And so people said they related to them much more than some of the more sentimental poems that were popular during the day.
Her poetry, didn't they?
They did. She was considered really one of the first modern poets, which is why she's still famous today.
Who found her poems?
Her sister. Did you know that? Because you nodded your head. I thought maybe you knew that. They were in a drawer, a lot of them. Everybody knew, her family knew, not everybody, but her family and her best friends knew that she wrote poetry. But again, the public didn't know because none of her poems were published with her name on them. She had a few very close friends who knew she wrote poetry, and she loved to write, and she wrote all the time.
She wrote at night too, didn't she?
She did do a lot of her writing
was at night.
But they were found, the poems, about 1,800 poems were found in a drawer in her bedroom after she died.
Wow.
And her sister, even though she didn't understand all of the poems, because they're not always easy to understand, her sister decided this is really important, they need to be published. So her sister and then a friend of her brother's, a family friend, got together with a publisher, and it took them a long time, even though he was a friend, to kind of convince him to publish her poetry. Wow. And the one thing that really convinced him was that they read her poems out loud. And when he heard them out loud, spoken, they had
a
alive. Power.
They came alive.
And a vitality that made him say, yes, these need to be published.
Isn't that interesting? Just reading them didn't quite do it as well as
hearing them.
Yeah.
And I have this book that's right there on the table is actually a copy of a first edition. It's not a first edition, it's an early edition, but that's what it looked like when that first edition came out. And that was the artwork on that first edition, done by one of the co-editors, Mabel Loomis Todd.
Wow.
And it sold out almost immediately.
Isn't that neat?
And then people wanted more.
Yeah. Now what's your next question, Lil?
What was Emily's family like?
She was very, very close to her family. Very close. In fact, she never got married. And her sister never got married. And she and her sister lived with their mother and father. Really, right after they both went to Emily went to college just for 1 year. She went to Mount Holyoke, and then she came back. Her sister, I'm not sure how long her sister went, if she graduated. And then they both came back and lived at the family home, the same home where Emily was born.
Wow.
And it was called the Homestead.
Yeah, so she didn't really want to go.
She really didn't, and that's another mystery. Why didn't she ever, really leave her home? They were very, very close. Her father was very strict, but she loved her father, but he had a very strong influence over the family. And a lot of people feel she never was able to leave his influence. Her brother she was very close to as well, and when her brother got married, her brother went to Harvard, and he graduated from Harvard Law, and when he got married, her father said, I will build you a house right next door.
Didn't want him to leave.
If you don't take that job in Chicago. And so her father and her brother and his wife ended up getting married and living right next door.
Did they have any children?
They did. They had 3 children. And Emily was very close to all of them, and especially the younger boy, Gilbert, who was born toward the end of Emily's life. He was born when Emily was in her 50s. Emily loved Gilbert, and she wrote some beautiful poems about Gilbert. He died young, though.
I think that's a piece of Emily that a lot of people didn't know, that she loved children, especially her nephews.
And playing with them, and she got right on their level. She didn't talk down to children. Children, when she became very reclusive and wouldn't see anybody, those children she always would see. And in fact would make gingerbread for them, and sometimes from her second-floor bedroom window would put it in a basket and on a string and bring it down for them to eat. Or she would bring them flowers or treats from the pantry and always invite them in.
That's so much fun. I bet they loved her. I can just
They
imagine
did
her
love
lowering
her.
that basket.
Oh
and
my
all
gosh,
the wonderful gingerbread in it.
Absolutely. She had a very whimsical, fun-loving spirit.
So she
and
had a
loved
very
them.
close relationship to those children, which does show another side of Emily.
Oh yes, I think
You know,
she
I
was
think-
could be very fun-loving
Yes.
and very joyful as well.
Which is really
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah, she.
What's your next question? We could go on forever. You know, this is
What did Emily like to do?
Well, she loved poetry. Words were her life. She once said that. Words are my life. She carried a lexicon around with her. Do you know what a lexicon is?
No.
It's just a fancy word for dictionary. And she carried a dictionary around with her a lot
Really?
and was an incredible wordsmith. She also read a lot. She knew the Bible through and through. She read the Bible from beginning to
Wow.
end, quoted from the Bible a lot. You'll find it a lot in her poetry. If you're going to study her poetry, have a dictionary and a Bible close by,
Wow.
because those were really her two main influences. And then after that, Shakespeare. She had read all of Shakespeare and loved Shakespeare. And of course did a lot of the reading. She had favorite authors of the day, like the Bronte sisters, and Elizabeth Barrett Browning she loved. She read some, and Emerson came to visit her over at the Evergreens, her brother and sister. Emerson would come through. I think she might have met Thoreau. So a lot of the famous
she was
writers
really
and thinkers of the day.
impacted.
She did love to bake, as we talked about, and she loved to garden. And she loved birds. She wrote a lot about birds, and she wrote, Vinny had cats, and Emily loved birds. And she was kind of bird-like, I think.
Yeah.
People describe her as being small and slight, and having a high-pitched voice, and walking in with a very light step,
sort of like a bird.
and kind
Yeah.
of bird-like. And she knew all kinds of birds, too.
Oh, neat. Well, next question.
What would it be like to meet Emily?
That's quite a question.
I don't think she would, I don't know if she would meet me, because she was a recluse at the end of her
I bet
life.
she would meet
but
Lily.
she would probably meet you, Lily.
she would.
If you had been friends with Gib was about 8 years old when he died, but if you had been friends with Gib when he was younger, one of his playmates, I bet anything she would have loved to have met you. And I think you would have found her very sparkly and joyful and fun.
Yeah.
But most older people that she didn't know from her late 30s on, she wouldn't really come downstairs to see them. When there were visitors, she would stay up in her room, or she'd sometimes stand at the top of the hallway and listen.
Because like people that are older, they have like more power and they could put her like on TV and stuff.
Well, there was no
Not
television
then.
at
Oh,
that time. I don't even know if it was power so much, maybe, but maybe it was that she felt they wouldn't understand her, maybe.
Or judge her?
Or
Maybe
she would
felt
have
they
to
would
talk
judge her.
small talk, and she didn't really like talking small talk. She saw the world in a way that was different from a lot
Much
of
deeper.
people, I think.
A much deeper perspective.
I think
yeah.
she did have a much deeper
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that it was difficult for her to engage in just trivial talk about the weather or this or that. And when she was young, she had very, very strong friendships. But she was often hurt because she wanted more out of the friendships sometimes
Than
than her
people were
friends
able to give,
were able to
yeah.
give, especially when her girlfriends went off and got married and had other interests. That was very hard for her. So I think at one point to save herself, because she was so
She went
sensitive,
deeper inside.
she decided
You know,
she
she
just
pulled
needed to be
away.
around only her family and very, very close friends,
Yeah.
because she felt things so deeply that it was hard for her to be in the world
Yeah.
sometimes. And I think even that poem, I'm Nobody, Who Are You, was part of that
which
too.
which Lily
I'm
is
gonna
going to read later.
That was it, yeah.
Do you have a favorite poem of hers, Paula, that you'd like to read for us?
Well, I feel like I've just scratched the surface on her poetry, and I did memorize a lot of the poems that were in the Belle of Amherst, and there were some beautiful ones and some powerful ones, and some that I had to read over and over even to try to kind of
Well, it
understand.
was amazing when you did your show. I mean, Paula gave this, how long, was it a 90-minute show?
It was a 90-minute show.
And it was
yes.
from memory. She did this whole beautiful, and we're going to be showing pictures of that.
Oh, you are?
Maybe a little video of that will be included in the
Oh,
we're
wonderful.
here.
Sally,
But
you helped me too. Sally actually would come over to my house sometimes
I held
and
book.
help me.
Yes,
We
well,
call it holding book
yeah.
when I'm trying to memorize. And Sally a couple of times held book for me while I just tried to go through and learn the lines and
It
work
was
on the
amazing.
show. And that's so important.
It was amazing to watch Paula with us, and I myself felt like I was getting to know Emily just from
Yes.
listening to what you were saying and how you
Yeah.
were saying. Could you
Yeah.
read one of our poems?
I do have a poem that I brought with me, and because it's been about a year since I did the show, I thought I'd better hold book because I may not know the poem. This was one that she wrote relatively early, and it's, I think, a more accessible poem than a lot of them, and it's about the sunrise and the sunset, and she's very confident about how the sun rises, and she kind of compares it to life in a small village, which is what Amherst was when she
the
was growing
time.
up, and she lived her whole life in Amherst. And then she, at the end of the poem, talks a little bit about the sunset, and she's not quite as sure about how the sun sets.
Yeah.
And a lot
Maybe
of
it's sort of life. She's
that's
looking
exactly
at it as life.
what a lot of people feel like. It's life, which we know much more about the beginnings of life than we understand
We
about
don't
the
understand
end,
the end.
the end of life.
Yeah.
So yes, I can just read it briefly. I'll tell you how the sun rose, a ribbon at a time. The steeples swam in amethyst. The news, like squirrels, ran. The hills untied their bonnets, the bobolinks begun. Then I said softly to myself, that must have been the sun. But how he set, I know not. There seemed a purple stile that little yellow boys and girls were climbing all the while, till when they reached the other side, a dominie in gray put gently up the evening bars and led the flock away.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So it's kind of like leading a flock of animals, a flock of children away. But it's very gentle and it's very beautiful, because a dominie we think of as a monk, perhaps, someone from the church, perhaps. She says in gray, maybe wearing a robe.
Wearing a robe, yeah.
And it's like they're climbing over the stile of the sunset and then being led away.
Her description is beautiful,
Yeah.
isn't it? The ribbons and absolutely.
And the ribbon and amethyst, the steeples swimming in that beautiful bluish purple that you see sometimes at sunset as well, that color. And I love, she says, the news like squirrels ran, because you know how the squirrels are always running, telling all the news, and the hills were untying their bonnets, you know, taking their bonnets off.
Oh, it's really, it's
So
just
she
so
uses
descriptive.
all
What do you
these.
think of it, Lil?
Yes.
It's neat, isn't
Yeah.
it? You can just almost picture it.
The little, and
As
it's all
you're
these
reading it.
village images of a
Yeah.
life in a village, which was a very small town at that time. Sometime it would be fun for you to go with your family or with Sally to
All of us.
Amherst and go to the museum, the Emily Dickinson
yeah.
Museum there, and you'd go walk through her house and you could see the bedroom where she wrote these poems on the second floor.
And didn't she write, I think I sort of, but she wrote at night a lot, didn't she?
Well, her father caught her, yes, writing at night sometimes, yes, because she would stay up late
She
at
was
night and
supposed
write.
to be in bed.
But she'd get up early in the morning anyway. They had a very disciplined household, and they'd get up early for morning prayers. And they all had to come downstairs, and she never missed.
Yeah, she
So-
was. But I found it very interesting that she would get up at night and light her
Yeah.
little light, and she'd write by just this little light. She'd write
Yeah,
all
she had a
these
small
beautiful-
room too. She had a single bed and a desk, small desk, probably by some lantern, I would imagine, or kerosene light.
There are so many
Yes.
interesting things about Emily. She was very complex, but very fragile in a way on one side of
Yes.
it,
Yeah.
and the other side of her
Yes.
was very strong.
Very strong.
So
yes.
she was a very complex
That's it.
person, and I think people kind of know her from one side or the other side. And I think what we wanted to do here today was to show that soft side of Emily, that side of her that was fragile and caring.
and yet a rebel, like you
Yes.
said.
Yes, she was. She stood up for what she believed in, didn't she?
Yes. Yeah.
Which I really like that part of her a lot. that
Well,
she was-
there's a story
Yeah.
when she was at Mount Holyoke. There was a lot of religious instruction when she went there, and she was brought up as a Protestant Christian. And at Mount Holyoke, there were a lot of religious revivals going on in the period, when they would ask you to stand up and declare your allegiance, your loyalty to Christ and to the faith of the time. That was the common faith. And she refused.
Can you
And
imagine
she
standing
refused
up and
because
saying
she
yes?
said, the Spirit hasn't moved me. And I can't stand up if I don't feel it. I can't stand up just because everybody else is standing up.
Yeah. And I thought that was really
And that
pretty
was
neat.
really scary for her, I'm
Yeah.
sure, because everybody else was.
Did her friends like believe in it?
Yes, and she would write them long letters about it, saying, I'm sorry, I would love to believe, I believe she was a very spiritual person. But she said at that time, she said, I just can't do it. And when there was a time in her 30s when she finally told her father, I'm not going to go to church anymore. And they accepted it. And she didn't, and she wrote a poem about it, how while they were at church, she was communing with God, but through the birds and the animals, and through just being at home listening to nature.
And in some ways, maybe she was closer to God in her way
In
than
her
some
way.
people are in the more structured way. This has been so much fun. You know, we could go on and on and on talking about Emily because she's such a was such a remarkable person. And Lily, was there one particular poem that the kids seemed to like at the museum? Would you read that for us?
It's called I'm Nobody.
And why do you think she wrote it?
Because her father, he was a lawyer and a politician, and her family was getting a lot of fame, but she didn't want all that fame.
Okay.
She just wanted to, like, I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? Then there's a pair of us. Don't tell, they'd advertise, you know. How dreary to be somebody. How public, like a frog, to tell one's name the livelong June to an admiring bog.
Isn't that great?
And you hear the
love
frogs
that.
in
You
the summer all the
yes.
time.
And how boring to be like everybody else.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. This has just been so great. Thank you both for being here. And I'm going to have you both back again. And we're going to continue this conversation. And I hope all of you out there enjoyed this as much as I did. And I know, did you enjoy it?
Oh, yes.
Did you like it, Lil?
Yes.
Will you come back and be my co-host again?
Yeah.
Good. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you'll come back and see us again. And until next time, keep talking. Ready? Ready. So let's talk.